Today I want to tell you a little bit about the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition that was in I think about 1914 to 1917. It was led by Ernest Shackleton, and they had a crew of about 28 people. And in the boat labeled the Endurance, which would actually come to really be the key word of their failed expedition. They were going to cross Antarctica from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea and be the first trans-Antarctic expedition. And they never made landfall. They got stuck in the ice and ended up stuck in the ice all winter, in the Antarctic winter. And eventually the ship was crushed and sank. And they were camped on the ice for a long time. And they wanted to head over to the open water and try to float to an island in their boats. But that proved very hard to do, and they were making about a couple miles a day. So they ended up camping for a long time and waiting for the ice to melt back some. And then they drug their boats like sleds, these big lifeboats, to the water and sailed to Elephant Island, which is a big chunk of stone and ice, and nothing much there except 28 stranded guys and penguins and seals. And so after a while of being there and getting themselves established, they took one of their boats and parts of some of the other boats, and they made one of their lifeboats up to a journey of sailing back to the last port they had been in, which was on South Georgia Island. And this was a trip of 800 miles, and it took them 14 days. So they sailed with 6 people and left 22 on shore, waiting for them to come back. And they sailed to South Georgia Island and ended up on the south side of the island. And the whaling port they had left, which was their last port of call, was on the north side of the island. And there was no way for them to sail around the island because the crew and the boat were not in any condition for that, and prevailing winds were not going to really help them. So after a couple days rest, 3 of them, including Ernest Shackleton, who was the leader of the expedition, climbed over the island. They were in very bad shape, very weak from their trip. I mean, they had been out drenched in sub-zero temperatures in a boat for a long time. And they left 3 people on shore, camped on the island under the boat that were not up for that crossing. And they climbed up, I think, about 3,000 foot within the first few hours of their climb, and they could look over and they could see where they were and see the north side of the island some. So they had to do some backtracking to get themselves in a line, and they made a 26-mile journey to that port, the only place elsewhere on the island where there were people. And it took them 36 hours, and it doesn't sound like they stopped the whole time. They left at 3 in the morning, and then with 36 hours, they must have arrived at about 3 in the afternoon 2 days later. And then the first thing that they did when they got there was to procure a boat that could go around and rescue the other 3 people on the other side of the island. And their next task was to find a boat to rescue the people off of Elephant Island, which they managed to get a boat in just a couple days and round up some people that volunteered as a crew. And when they got there, they couldn't get within 70 miles. That's as close as they could get to where those people were on the island because of ice around Elephant Island. And it took 3 more attempts to get to them. And 3 months after they had gotten back to the South Georgia Island. It took 3 months by then to get and rescue the other 22 people. And everybody got out of there alive. And so why am I telling you about this story from over 100 years ago? Well, for me, it brings up several Dharma analogies. And I often think of a bodhisattva's endeavor to attain the qualities of a Buddha and liberate all beings as like a group of people lost in the wilderness who send maybe 1 or 2 people off to go and find help and to come back, And I usually think of this in a way more like people lost in a forest or something. But I tend to think of this story, this what happened to these guys in these same terms. And I'm not trying to in any way impute any motivations for Shackleton or anybody on his crew. To me, the whole thing was a worldly endeavor. I don't know why they wanted to do that, I guess for fame or whatever. For me, that seems like a fool's errand anyways. But I think about, if I had to guess about Shackleton's motivation for keeping everybody together and keeping everybody alive, I would have to say one is if he ever wanted to do another expedition, that was probably an important part of going to be the causes for that. Also, he had some accountability, I'm sure, as being in charge of that expedition, and some sense of responsibility that was probably that he held personally. And maybe he had just a general heartfelt concern for everybody involved. If I had to guess, I would probably say there's a mixture of some of these things, But, and even when the ship sank and they were still on the ice, one of the crew said, "The ship is sunk. We're no longer bound by maritime law. I don't have to follow your orders and do work." And Shackleton is reported as spending hours out on the ice talking to this man and telling him, if you go off alone and don't cooperate, or if you set a precedent where we don't all cooperate and work together, you're going to perish, or we're all going to perish if we don't work together. So he, and these two never got along well after that, but he did convince the man to stay with him. And he was actually the carpenter. So he was key in putting together the components of that boat that was able to sail, because they took some planks out of some other boats and stuff. I think about their fortitude in their fortitude in general, just surviving out on the ice. I mean, there's pictures of these people and they're just day after day, they're living out on the ice in Antarctica in that weather, and then being in a boat. How can people survive in a boat when it's below zero and they're wet? But also the fortitude of really, what comes to me is when the 3 of them climbed over the mountains to go down the other side to get help. And they had to be so weak by then, and they didn't stop. And they went, as soon as they got there, people were telling him, "You need to rest now." And he's like, "No, I have to get a boat to get these men." And that's because I've read this story in the past. I've researched it a little now, and I remember that a lot, that one of the guys, the house he went to find a captain that had a boat, they say he turned his head and cried because he knew Shackleton and he was hardly recognizable. He was so thin, and yet his thought was, we got to get these guys. And their fortitude and their for the purpose they're on. And I think about our practice and our fortitude, And luckily, we mostly don't have to deal with such worldly extremes. But we have our daily practice of waking up every morning, doing our practice of meditation. we get ourselves fed, or maybe we're on breakfast crew and help get everybody fed, and we do our practice of offering service, and then we do our practice of study, and we end our day with our practice of meditation again, day in and day out, over and over. And this is the practice that we're given. This is our practice of one foot in front of another, going towards enlightenment, so that we can be a benefit to others. And sometimes this progress can seem very slow. Sometimes we may feel like we're making progress, and then we have a time when we have a hard day, or we come up against afflictions and we get overwhelmed by them. I know how that can feel myself, I can be very dissatisfied with my own conduct and go into despondency. And, our progress may be like little ups and downs. And if we go into that despondency, it's not a little down anymore. We just keep going down. And we just have to keep moving with our daily practice. And whatever little progress we make in this life makes a big difference, because, well, we have to create the conditions to continue our journey in our next life and our next life. But also, if I think I need to, when I have a lot of progress I have to make to get to Buddhahood, immense. And if I don't take those little steps, some little steps now, what makes me think I'll take those little steps in my next life? There's no standing still. There's no standing still. We come up against afflictions, and we either habituate ourselves to countering those afflictions, or we continue to habituate ourselves to being overwhelmed by those afflictions. So I think about that when I think about how Shackleton and his two companions crossed the mountains, because they went up and they could see, and then they had to backtrack. They could see where they had gone wrong, and they had to backtrack and go somewhere else. And they had ups and downs through their whole little journey of 36 hours. And when you're running 36 hours, no sleep and tired, and you get up to a peak and you realize, oh, now I see where you have to go. We have to go back down where we were and around, And when I feel like I'm making progress in love and compassion, and then I'm overwhelmed by anger, I can feel like, oh man, I'm making no progress. But that's not necessarily true. How I deal with how I deal with falling down and getting back up, if I can do that in a good way, that's progress. There's a lot of differences. All analogies I was using this whole expedition as a very loose analogy to draw a few Dharma points out of. But all analogies have differences. And sometimes the differences can be points to look at too. And I think about when we study and we learn and we're taught all these things about the Bodhisattva path, way beyond where we are. And we have a map that sets out where we're going and where we're going to be, and what from people who have traversed this. And when Shackleton and these other two climbed up that mountain, they were going over mountains that we don't know if anybody had ever gone over before. They had no map. They were guessing where they were at. And when they got up there, they could see more, but they still didn't know what was things out of sight, where we have a map. But something that really struck me when I thought about this with analogies is as these men were working to rescue the other 22 on Elephant Island, and then they had 2 to 3 more down on the beach, who all wanted rescued. And as bodhisattvas, we're working to become fully awakened Buddhas. If we have this bodhicitta motivation, I don't have it spontaneously. I can't call myself a bodhisattva, But a bodhisattva is working for the benefit of all beings. And the vast majority of those beings have no idea they want to be rescued. They don't. And this is about the first noble truth. What is it that the Buddha said about the first noble truth? It is to be recognized. The vast majority of sentient beings have not recognized this. Have we recognized it? When I look at myself, I've recognized some points of it. I can't say that I strongly understand it, and even what intellectual understanding of I have, there's a lot of things that I'm drawn to that are my suffering. We cling to our suffering. And so really the conclusion I want to draw from this is to really the analogy of the bodhisattva on a journey to rescue others, to view all sentient beings as with a compassionate concern, and our practice as like going for help. It's like we're going to get a Buddha to come and help, but we're not going to go get Shakyamuni Buddha to come help. We're going to go and deal with realizing the three refuges within ourselves so that we can be a Buddha to help. And another thing that was very different in this story than what we're talking about is every one of those 28 people survived, and they finally got to go home to World War I. And most of them ended up fighting in World War I. And even if they weren't, the world was at war. This is a very different thing than what we're trying to they got rescued and they're still in hell. I mean samsara, but World War I, that's what they went home to. And we're looking at trying to rescue all beings in a very big way to get them out of samsara. And in order to do that, we have to overcome our own afflictions. Just to stop harming others, I have to overcome my own afflictions. And in order to do that, we really have to have a lot of fortitude, and we have to have try to have a very kind outlook towards all beings and a real concern for them. That's where the Bodhichitta motivation comes from, and that motivation is what will give us the fortitude. Well, it's a motivation. It will motivate us to develop the fortitude and all the things we need to become fully awakened. If we are motivated by a great concern for all beings, we will be constantly driven. I wonder if Shackleton, if he hadn't had other people depending on him, might have sat down and died in the snow. But he had other people, and we have all sentient beings that we're concerned about. And so we can use this to drive us to just continue our practice and not worry about me. I know when I misbehave and I'm despondent with myself, that's the self-centered thought. It's like, oh, I'm not practicing well. Just get up from that and say, self-centered mind, you can sit here. And to keep going and just always to have that concern for others.